Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into a really persistent idea, the hypothesis that governmental institutions deliberately hid evidence about the Roswell UFO incident back in 1947.
It's certainly an event that still sparks intense debate, loads of theory swirling around it.
Absolutely. And our goal here isn't to solve it definitively, but to objectively evaluate the information we have about this specific concealment hypothesis based on the sources available to us.
We should probably start with the basics. Summer 47, near Roswell, New Mexico, some debris is found.
Right, and a military, specifically Roswell Army Airfield, puts out a press release on July 8th, Public Information Officer Walter Helt.
And it talks about recovering a flying disc. Pretty sensational stuff.
But then, almost immediately,
Within 24 hours, yes. They retracted it. The official line became that it was just debris from a standard weather balloon.
it's worth pointing out, isn't it, that RAAF was a significant base, home of the 519th Bomb Group?
That's correct. The only unit at the time capable of nuclear delivery. So high security, sensitive operations were the norm there.
And the people involved in the recovery and the explanation.
Well, Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett were the main officers sent out to the site initially to gather the material.
Okay.
And then later, figures like Brigadier General Roger Ramey up the chain of command and Colonel Thomas DuBose were involved in presenting the weather balloon story to the press.
That very quick switch, flying disc to weather balloon, that's really the seed of the cover-up idea, isn't it?
It certainly laid the groundwork for decades of suspicion. It's the point people always come back to. Why the change?
So how did we get from that initial confusion to full-blown conspiracy theories involving aliens?
Well, things were relatively quiet for a long time, but the real catalyst seems to have been in 1978.
Okay, what happened then?
Jesse Marcel, the Air Force intelligence officer who'd recovered the debris, retired by then, gave an interview. He claimed the weather balloon story was absolutely a cover-up.
And he said what it really was.
He speculated it was extraterrestrial. He described materials unlike anything he knew, suggesting off-world origins.
That must have caused a stir.
It did, and it really gained momentum with the publication of a book in 1980, The Roswell Incident.
What did the book add?
It heavily featured Marcel's revised account, his claims of strange materials, but it also introduced something new, the idea of alien bodies being found, specifically out on the plains of San Agustin, which is quite a distance from the original debris field near Corona.
Wait, so Marcel himself didn't originally mention bodies?
No, his initial focus, even in the 1978 interview, was on the nature of the debris. The body claims seem to have been integrated into the narrative primarily through this book and subsequent accounts.
So the story started to snowball.
Yeah.
From weird debris to alien body.
Exactly. And from there, the theories just kept expanding over the years. You started hearing about systematic government concealment, not just of debris, but of actual extraterrestrial beings.
Multiple crash sites, I've heard.
Yes, claims of multiple crashed saucers, detailed descriptions of alien corpses, alleged autopsies.
And even reverse-engineered alien technology.
That, too, became part of the more elaborate narratives. But it's really important to stress, based on the source material we've reviewed, these more dramatic claims lack verifiable factual basis.
Given all this growing speculation, how did the Air Force officially respond later on?
While facing increasing public interest and pressure, the U.S. Air Force conducted investigations and released reports in the 1990s.
And their conclusion?
Their consistent conclusion was that the Roswell incident wasn't extraterrestrial at all, but was actually linked to something called Project Mogul.
Project Mogul. Okay, that sounds classified.
It was highly classified at the time. It was a Cold War military program.
What was its purpose?
It used trains of high-altitude balloons carrying sensitive acoustic sensors. The idea was to try and detect sound waves from potential Soviet nuclear bomb tests way up in the atmosphere.
High-altitude balloons. So how does that connect to Roswell?
The Air Force reports detailed a specific Mogul balloon train launched from Alamogordo Army Airfield on June 4th, 1947. They lost contact with it.
And it came down near Roswell.
It came down near the ranch owned by Mac Brazel, the exact area where the debris was found. The timing and location fit.
So the Air Force explanation is that the weather balloon story was itself a cover.
Precisely. They argue it was a cover story not for aliens, but to protect the secrecy of Project Mogul. They didn't want the Soviets or anyone knowing about this surveillance capability.
What kind of materials did these Mogul balloons use? Does that match the descriptions?
Well, the debris from Mogul included things like radar reflectors made of foil, neoprene rubber balloons, reinforced tape, sometimes with designs on it, and lightweight wooden beams or dowels for structure.
And how does that compare to what was found?
It actually aligns pretty well with some of the early descriptions of the wreckage.
Including Marcel's.
Yes, interestingly, in an interview Jesse Marcel gave in Fort Worth right after the recovery in 47, before his later claims, he described the wreckage as, quote, parts of the weather device made of tinfoil and broken wooden beams.
That's quite different from his later statements about exotic materials.
It is. That initial description sounds very much like Mogul debris.
Okay, so the Mogul explanation addresses the debris. But what about those claims of truly unusual, perhaps alien materials that Marcel and others later talked about?
Well, the evidence for truly extraordinary materials is weak, according to our sources. Captain Sheridan Cavett, who collected the debris with Marcel, gave a much more mundane account. He described typical balloon-type debris, nothing extraordinary.
So, a direct contradiction to Marcel's later story.
Essentially, yes. Cavett's recollection didn't support the idea of super-strong foils or I-beams with strange symbols that Marcel later described.
Any other witnesses to the debris itself?
Mac Brazel's daughter, Bessie Brazel Schreiber, also handled some of the material her father brought home. Her description: she mentioned waxed paper and a sort of aluminum-like foil, and importantly, she recalled seeing tape stuck to the foil that had pastel-colored flower-like figures printed on it.
Flower figures on
Yeah.
alien technology.
Seems unlikely, but that kind of pattern tape was reportedly used on some Project Mogul balloons, sometimes as reinforcement or identification, so her description actually points towards Mogul, not away from it.
All right, let's shift to the element that really captured public imagination, the alleged alien bodies. Where did those stories originate?
As we mentioned, they weren't really part of the initial 1947 event reports. They emerged much later, often through secondhand or third-hand accounts, and became prominent with the 1980 book.
Any specific examples?
A notable one is Glenn Dennis, who worked as a mortician in Roswell. Years later, he claimed he'd received inquiries from the airbase around that time about small, hermetically sealed caskets and body preservation techniques.
Did he see anything himself?
He also recounted a story supposedly told to him by a nurse at the base hospital about witnessing an autopsy on small, non-human bodies.
But is there corroboration for Dennis's story? Or the nurse's?
That's the issue. There's no independent corroboration for these specific claims. Investigations later found inconsistencies and potential fabrications in Dennis's accounts, and the identity, even the existence of the nurse he named, has been questioned.
And then there was that infamous alien autopsy film in the 90s.
Ah, yes, the Santilli footage. Released in 1995, Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, purported to show the actual autopsy of an alien recovered from Roswell.
Huge sensation at the time.
Massive. But the filmmaker, Ray Santilli, later admitted it wasn't original footage. He claimed it was a reconstruction of a real film he'd seen, but which had deteriorated.
Did he ever produce the original deteriorated film?
No, he never provided any evidence that this supposed original film ever existed.
And wasn't it later definitively shown to be a fake?
Yes, a documentary, Eamon Investigates, the Alien Autopsy, exposed the staged nature of the film. They even found the sculptor who created the alien dummies, and analysis showed things like sheep brains being used. It was thoroughly debunked as a hoax.
It sounds like hoaxes and maybe misinformation have really clouded the picture over the years.
They absolutely have. It's not just the autopsy film. There was an earlier incident, the Aztec, New Mexico crash saucer hoax in 1948.
A year after Roswell.
Yes. And that story, promoted by a writer named Frank Scully based on claims from supposed scientists, included many elements that later got woven into the Roswell narrative: a crashed disk, small humanoid bodies recovered, advanced materials. It was later exposed as a fraud concocted by con artists.
So elements might have migrated from one story to another?
It's very possible. Then there's the Majestic 12 or MJ-12 documents.
Right, those surfaced in the 80s, didn't they?
Yeah.
Supposedly top-secret government papers about a committee formed to handle the Roswell crash and alien tech.
Exactly, but forensic analysis by the FBI and independent researchers concluded they were fakes, likely created using typewriters and signature styles inconsistent with the supposed 1940s-50s time frame.
And wasn't there an admission about deliberately spreading disinformation?
Yes, Bill Moore, one of the authors of the Roswell incident and someone involved in circulating the MJ-12 documents, later confessed that he had intentionally fed fake information, including some related to MJ-12, to another prominent UFO researcher, Paul Benowitz, apparently at the behest of Air Force intelligence agents seeking to discredit Benowitz. It adds another layer of complexity and deliberate confusion.
Wow. So with all these conflicting stories, hoaxes, and evolving accounts decades later, what's the state of the actual witness testimony? Is it reliable?
It's incredibly challenging. You have numerous individuals claiming some connection, often decades after 1947. Their accounts frequently contradict each other on fundamental details, the exact crash location, the number of sites where bodies were found, if any.
Leading to splits, even among believers.
Oh, definitely. Ufologists themselves are divided, promoting different timelines, locations, and witness accounts, often mutually exclusive. We already mentioned the inconsistencies in Glenn Dennis's story, for example. This proliferation of competing narratives makes establishing a clear, factual baseline from testimony alone very difficult.
Did the Air Force offer any explanation for why people might later think they saw alien bodies, even if it wasn't related to Roswell 47?
Yes, their 1997 report, the follow-up to the Mogul explanation, addressed the body claims more directly.
What did they suggest?
They proposed that many of the later eyewitness accounts describing alien bodies likely stemmed from people misremembering or conflating different events over time. Specifically, they pointed to military activities involving anthropomorphic dummies.
Dummies. Like crash test dummies.
Sort of. These were used in high-altitude parachute tests and other aerospace research projects, primarily in the 1950s, after Roswell. They were designed to simulate human bodies.
And how would that connect to alien sightings?
The recovery operations for these dummies sometimes involved air crashes or retrieving them from remote areas. The dummies themselves could look somewhat unsettling, and they were often transported in large canvas or insulation bags.
Like body bags.
Exactly. The Air Force argued that seeing military personnel recovering these dummy-filled bags from crash sites in later years could easily have been misremembered or distorted over time into stories about retrieving small alien bodies from a flying saucer crash, especially once the Roswell alien narrative became popular.
So a case of potentially conflated memories decades later.
That was the Air Force's explanation for at least some of the body accounts that emerged long after 1947.
Okay, bringing this all together then. Based on the sources we've looked at for this deep dive, what can we reasonably conclude about that central hypothesis, intentional government concealment of extraterrestrial evidence from Roswell?
Well, to summarize, the evidence strongly suggests that the initial event involved the crash of a classified Project Mogul balloon array. The initial confusion and the military's subsequent use of the weather balloon story as a cover for Mogul undoubtedly created an environment where suspicion could grow.
So secrecy was involved, but maybe not about aliens.
That's what the bulk of the documented evidence points to. While there was certainly secrecy surrounding Project Mogul, the specific hypothesis of a deliberate, ongoing government conspiracy to hide captured alien craft and bodies from Roswell lacks solid, verifiable factual support within these sources. The more elaborate claims appear to be built on later, often contradictory accounts, hoaxes, and misinterpretations.
Yet the Roswell story persists. It's huge in popular culture.
Oh, undeniably. It's become a cornerstone of modern UFO lore. It's inspired countless books, films, TV shows. Roswell, the town, has built a whole identity and tourism industry around it. Its cultural impact is massive, far exceeding the likely mundane reality of the original event.
It really shows how a narrative can take hold, doesn't it? Especially when you mix initial confusion, government secrecy, and the very compelling idea of extraterrestrial contact.
Absolutely. The Roswell incident is perhaps the quintessential example of how those elements can combine to create a mythos that endures for decades, generating its own evidence along the way, even when more conventional explanations exist.
It leaves you wondering, perhaps, less about aliens and more about why we find these narratives of hidden knowledge and extraordinary events so compelling, even when concrete proof remains elusive.
That's a fascinating question in itself, the psychology behind belief and the power of storytelling.
Indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thank you for listening.